This is an overview of the report webinar, and then there's a series of webinars that we're starting around how to implement the things that we've learned from the report. So some of that will be in today's report, but we're really focused on making practical some of the things that we learned from this today. So we still have some folks joining, but I'm going to get started. Appreciate those of you that are prompt. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about this report we did and a little bit why we did it, what we learned, what do we know about how nonprofits are using video. I think many organizations love to have some sense of what their peers are doing, and that was one of the purposes here. We're going to talk a little bit about distribution and networking. So what do we do with all this video that we do? And talk a little about the future. Where is all this going? Because I think we can't just be reactive to where things are today. We have to be thinking about how is the world changing and how are we on a path that goes in the same direction as the world around us. So just a little bit about See3 before we start. See3, our slogan here, Vision Creating Impact, is really about working with organizations that have a vision and combine with our vision of what's possible and creating strategies and media that create impact. That's really what we're all about. It's not about video or other tactical things. It's really about results. That's what matters. There's no, you're not judged on the YouTube views you get. Ultimately, you're judged on the change and the difference you make in the world that you work in. And so that's how we think. And all of those other things that we talk about are a means to an end. So we implement video strategies as well as doing video creative. We do creative production distribution. We have a whole web design and development team. And we really think about what's the right fit for the organizations we work with. So we're not a one-size-fits-all kind of company. You may have heard of some of our clients. And so let me just jump in and just start with why are we even talking about this and why did we bother to do this report? And that's because video is huge. And if you're not living in a cave, you have been watching online video. And it's amazing how quickly this whole world of technology is moving, but in particular how quickly the world of video has moved. When we started See3, people did not want to talk about video because video was not something that was a good experience online. If you remember those Microsoft's Windows players and the Real Player and all those things, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And most people were still in dial-up. And it's hard to even imagine that that wasn't so long ago. And YouTube didn't even exist then when we started the Do-Gooder Nonprofit Video Awards. It was around the exact same time as YouTube started, and YouTube's only about 8 years old, which is incredible. So the amount of content is staggering. Every month, 4 billion hours of video are being viewed on YouTube. That's just YouTube. YouTube is the largest site where there is video, but it's not the only one. And so we're just seeing video all over the place. We're seeing the numbers. And the things that blow me away are the statistics that are coming out of Cisco, which runs a lot of the infrastructure of the Internet. And they're saying that already over half of all the data on the Internet is video, and that they expect that in just 3 or 4 years to be up in their 80+% range, which is incredible. So obviously video files are large, but they carry a lot of information, and that's where the attention is. And so the question for nonprofits, the critical question I think is, if this is the world that we live in, if the world of watching video about everything and all the time, are we equipped for this? And how do we get there? And what does it mean for us? And what's the path? So let's jump in. So the survey that we did, the report, is built upon a survey. We had almost 500 participants. They were divided between senior management, communications, and development fundraising. We have a representative type of organizations that have been involved that filled out the survey. So we had large organizations, medium, and small organizations. We'll show you some of the diversity of the missions there, and also a broad range of experience in video. So we think that the sample size, the statistically significant sample that we had, also is fairly representative of what the nonprofit world looks like. And then we also got from YouTube some data around the nonprofits on their platform. So they never released any specific data about the nonprofits before, and they did for this report. So we'll talk a little bit about what do we know from what's happening on YouTube among the 20,000 or so nonprofits that are in the YouTube nonprofit program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we look at the organizations that participated, as you can see, we have many different sectors. Our segments are represented here, everything from animals and environment to human services and religious organizations. And I think one of the things we did in the analysis phase was to look at what are we learning about how different organizations use video differently. Do animal organizations, for example, use video differently than environmental or health organizations? And there were some things that were interesting, and those things are in the report. I would say overall, and this probably wouldn't come as a surprise to you, the size of an organization is more a determinant of video usage in a way than what their particular issue is, though there were some interesting things around the issues. So what did we learn? What's sort of the big picture and big takeaways here? The first thing is that an incredible consensus that video is important, and not only video is important in general, but video is important to organizations today, and they think that it will only get more important in the future. But there's also a kind of underlying discomfort around using video effectively and measuring impact. And so that's something that really came out of the report and that we think is the place where our nonprofit community needs to grow, where individual organizations need to think carefully about what video is supposed to be doing for them, how do they know that it's doing that for them, and where do they make the right kinds of investments. So this is something I think that was very interesting and important along that same theme, and that is that 92% of respondents value the investment that they've made in video, and 87% want to produce more, and 80% think that video is important to their organization. But 70% think that their funds for video will remain the same or decrease. And so only about a quarter expect a slight increase. So 30% expect some increase in their video budget, and 70% don't. And so there seems to be a very strange gap there between a strong belief that's very broad-based that video is really important and where investment dollars are going. And so we tried to do some investigation about what is it about that gap. And so one of the things that we did along with the survey was we did in-depth interviews with about 25 organizations, also representing a sample of different types and sizes. And that helped us dig down into some of these issues and understand them better. So why, we asked, are you not making more video? And again, it wouldn't come as a surprise to you that there's a sense that if we had more money, we could do more video. And I think what we'll talk about a little bit is that is true and it's not true. We're increasingly seeing the ability to create videos in-house and with low-cost equipment. And so in some ways, there are cultural barriers to doing that. But generally, if the only video you've done and the only video capabilities you have is to hire professionals, then certainly budget becomes that big issue. But it wasn't the only issue here, and I think looking into these other ones is useful as well. Training. So about 20% of organizations said that they lack the training to do more video. And I think that that's something that is interesting because there are available training for video, and I think increasingly, and in some of our interviews we learned that some of that has to do with the staff. Who is the right staff for that, and what is the amount of time that they have to do it? And that goes to our next one, which is half reported that the lack of in-house staff or talent around video was a barrier to them creating more. And I think that this, and I'll talk about this some more, is related to what we've seen in the web. I mean, think about how many people inside organizations today, for example, know social media. Well, that wasn't true when social media was just starting out, but now when organizations are hiring, even for other types of positions, for fundraising or comms positions, somebody saying, I understand social media, I use social media, well, that helps your candidacy for those jobs, even if those jobs are not just social media jobs. And I think that that's where this is going with video, the idea that this is a skill set that we need to have. How are we getting that skill set? Another thing which is interesting, almost 40% saying that they have a problem with silos. And I think in our interviews, we saw this more frequently in the larger organizations where they are more siloed. But an example would be an organization where there's some video budget in the communications department, but the fundraising team doesn't have access to that and isn't involved in the choosing of the subjects and the shooting and the filming. And so there's really no economies of scale, and there's no leverage to use the same work across these different departments. And that certainly holds organizations back from being able to maximize their investment. And then the last one, which I think in some ways is the most important, which is, and we'll dig into this number a little bit more, but 20% of the organizations saying, we don't know if it works or not. And I think that does explain some of that gap between thinking that video is important and not investing in it. Because if you can't show the numbers, and we're so used to metrics, right? There's metrics everywhere, and the internet has, in a way, forced so many direct ability to directly know whether somebody clicked on this or shared it or did something. And with video, we're at the infancy of the measurement process, in the sense of really understanding what was this video supposed to do, and did it do it for us, and how do we measure it? And the biggest measure that we have, again, is views. And views are not necessarily the thing that matters to us. And I will talk a little bit more about that. So let's dig into that measuring impact question for a second. So 76% of the nonprofits that responded said they don't know how to measure the impact of their videos, or they only track that measurement anecdotally. That's incredible. So it seems quite obvious that if you have something where people don't know how to track it, if smart leadership would say, well, when you figure that out, then you can come to me with that budget request for video. In the meantime, how do we know? And so if you see anecdotally and do not know are the big numbers here. And I think, and I just want to say, that anecdotally can still have value, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But organizations, obviously the next biggest thing is views. And I think it's a very interesting twist of fate that YouTube decided to put that views number right on the front page of every video, right next to the video. It says how many views it got. And that seems so obvious to us now, but it wasn't necessarily the only choice, right? But it's trained us to think in terms of views equaling value. And I think that that is sometimes true among nonprofits and not always. I know several, actually many examples of videos that had high numbers of views that were only good for your ego because those views didn't translate into anything else, didn't translate into web traffic, didn't translate into signups, didn't translate into dollars. And so views in and of themselves have to be part of some chain reaction, some theory that views are going to lead to something else. And I think because views are so prominent, they haven't always been thought through that way. And so when people are just tracking according to views, they may be saying, this wasn't successful, but they don't necessarily know that or not. Or the opposite, of course, which is saying this was successful because it got more views than we normally get, let's say, but did it translate into any actions that you wanted? And again, that's often challenging. So one of the clear things that came out of this report and the work we've done around it is the most important thing you can do to improve the ROI of a video is to define those goals in the first place, and then to decide how are we going to know whether we succeed or not. And that seems so obvious and simple, and is so frequently not done. It's remarkable. So to sit down and say, what do we really think will happen with this video? And how do we know whether that happened or not? And so every video doesn't have to play the entire role of something big. And I think this is a very important point, because often videos are made and there's way too much riding on that video. If you think about fundraising as an example, and you think about a fundraising cycle, people become aware of an issue. They learn about an organization. They're solicited for funds. They give money. They're thanked. They're stewarded in their work. They're told about what their money was used for. There's often an upgrade path, right? And then the cycle repeats. And video can play a role in that cycle in many different places. But the idea that this one video is going to play all of those roles, or the video is going to do everything from introduce somebody who's never heard of you to an issue to the point where they're ready to give, may not be realistic. On the other hand, video may set the emotional foundation for an ask that comes in a different way. Or the video may be great for the tail end of that cycle, thanking donors and getting them to upgrade, for example. But often there isn't the thought through about where is this video fitting and what is it designed to do. So when we ask people why they're making their videos in the first place, this is what we got. 87% saying they have made videos for marketing and awareness, 46% for fundraising, 32% for membership, and 30% for advocacy. And this isn't really surprising. I think that marketing and awareness is something that most organizations who have videos for, and it's not a coincidence that it coincides with the 76% or so saying they don't know how to measure, because this category of marketing awareness is the easiest one to say we don't have to measure that well because it's just awareness raising, right? Whereas the fundraisers are used to a different kind of accountability. When you do direct mail fundraising, for example, you know exactly what it's supposed to do. You know exactly how much it costs. You know exactly how much your return needs to be for that investment to make sense. And so because you can't necessarily put that same kind of metric set, that same kind of maturity around video efforts, it's no wonder that videos are used less in those areas where there's much more clear need for clear measurement and clear results. So I want to pause for a second and just tell you a story of one of the folks that participated in the survey, and that's St. Judes. The fundraising of our arm of St. Judes is called ALSAC, and they did an incredible thing in the last year, which I think is really unique and remarkable, and that is that they doubled the size of their video team basically from 9 people to 18 people. So they hired nine full-time staff were added in the video department in 1 year. First of all, having that many staff in the video department is completely unique among even larger organizations. You don't see that very often. But to make that kind of investment all at once is incredible. But even more than that, they bought new equipment. They bought new camera equipment. They bought new systems in terms of video editing and storage. And they made really a massive investment in video. And so the question there, and they're a fundraising operation, right? That's their purpose, is fundraising. So the question there seems to fly in the face of some of what we saw in the survey, in the sense that fundraising is harder to to measure with video, and we're seeing less use of video in fundraising or by fundraisers in our survey. So why? So St. Jude's is kind of an outlier there, and the question is why? What do they know that other people don't know? And I think there's some things to learn there in that story, and that is that they have seen video. There are certain things that they know they need. They use video. They have many, many events all over the country all the time, and even all over the world. And people putting on those events are often other groups that put on those events, and they feed those other groups assets like videos as well. They also, as I'm sure you've seen, do a lot of direct response video and other kinds of video work. And so they were able to do certain things with numbers. For example, understand the cost of outsourcing versus the cost of in-house and making smart decisions around that. But they weren't able to draw a direct line between the cost and the effort around one video and the money that that video raised. And nevertheless made the decision to make this investment. And as you see in the quote here, one of the reasons is that anecdotal reason that the leadership of St. Jude's and Alphac go to these events, and they see that the videos create a foundation, an emotional foundation that's conducive to giving and the ask. So even when the video is not carrying the ask, they've seen in person and with their own eyes the effects that these videos have on people and their fundraising. And so when they look at their current needs around that, but then they look at the future and they look at what's happening online and they see where the world's going, where video is going to become even more important, then they decided, hey, this is where we need to be. We want to be ahead of the curve, not behind it, and we're going to make this investment. And so I think that's just an incredible story, and really shows some leadership and really the idea that they want to maintain their position in fundraising. Another use of video, and where we got some data here, is about advocacy and using video in advocacy. We're seeing video used in things like petitions and to drive petitions, signatures, which is often used for list growth as much as it is for those advocacy asks. And we're seeing new kinds of technologies around that. One of which is from us. We've created a product called Propel It, which hasn't yet launched, which you can see. I'm not going to talk much about today, but you can see more about it there. But basically the idea is that people can use their iPhones and Android phones to record videos for advocacy and eventually other things in a way that gives the organization usable content. So basically it makes the user hold the phone in the right way. It tells them to go to a quiet place and it not to be backlit and those kinds of things. And very importantly, it only gives them a fixed amount of time, a short amount of time to record that video, and then they can re-record it if they don't like it. But the idea is more like voicemail. You finish it, which means there's no editing. And then that video gets uploaded automatically into specific kinds of web pages that get delivered to either petition targets or related to fundraising or whatever. So the idea is, again, in the world where we need more video, not all of it can be created by professionals where it's expensive. How do we use the new tools in a way that gets to the things that we need? So when we ask people about views, where are people watching your video? I think this is very instructive and probably mirrors your own results, which is more than half of the people watching our videos are already our constituents, right? They're coming because we sent them an email to watch it. They're coming because they know about our website, and that's the primary place that people are responding to our video. But what we do see is that the social sharing piece is second, so social media, and growing. And so that's the area where I think we're going to see a lot of growth. And one of the things we have to keep in mind as we talk about social media and the importance of social media for video, what drives social media is your existing constituents, right? It's your existing constituents, it's the people that you have connections with by email, for example, that go first to the content and and then are able then to share that content in their networks and expand your network by doing so. And so there's a real harmony between how we message and communicate with our own constituents and how we have success on social media. So let's talk a little bit about distribution here, because related to where views are coming from, the world of distribution has changed a lot, and I think this is where the paradigm shift is we're in mid-shift, because the old way for video is television, and television is something that was always out of reach for everyone except the very largest organizations that were able to do PSAs or able to work with the ad council or things like that. And so 99% of organizations were not playing in the TV world, and therefore never built the capacity to make and distribute video. But we're seeing a breakdown of these old media things. So it's not that TV, it doesn't still have some value, but if you watch what's happening with newspaper and traditional media companies, for example, you know that the world has changed, and that we see a much more distributed network of places that people are watching. So if you think about 20, 30 years ago, the number of people who are watching primetime television shows, today the biggest television shows are a fraction of those old numbers, because there's way more channels, there's internet, there's whole different places to get content have exploded, and so there isn't that those few gatekeepers. And there's a benefit to that, and there's a downside to that. And the benefit is that you are an equal to anyone else in this new world. Your website is the same as the website of ABC or some media creator. It's just as easy for a person to get to your website as it is any other website. So in a way, you have a channel. You're in that mix, and you can play in that mix. And what's keeping you from playing in that mix is the content. The downside is there's so much content, and so we're in a world where there's the most important commodity is attention. We're in this attention economy, and gaining people's attention and creating content that's both interesting but also shareable becomes very important. And that takes some skill and some work. So we're, again, in the middle of this shift. So I want to just talk about for a second about a new ways of thinking about media. This is a model that comes from our partner in this report, Edelman, which is the biggest independent PR firm in the world, and they do a lot of work on content, and they think about content in this cloverleaf way. So they think about content and conversation through the prism of transmedia storytelling, so not just one type of media. They look at the media universe as these four leaves of a clover. So there's traditional media for broad reach. There's hybrid media, which amplifies stories and social media. So things like the Huffington Post, as an example, which is sort of like a newspaper, but not quite. They call that hybrid media. Then there's social media, so connecting the social networks and, again, to people that you may not have direct access to. And then there's the owned media assets, things like a company's website, the mobile assets, and other owned content. And at the center of this cloverleaf are search and video. And that's something actually that I haven't mentioned, that that YouTube is the second busiest search engine in the world. And so many people are starting with video. They're not just searching on Google, they're going to YouTube to search, because if I want to learn about something, there's most likely a video about it, and that's the way I'm choosing to get content. So effective strategies across all these four leaves include the use of compelling content like video and audio and photographs and infographics and text, as well as search tools and insights to ensure that the story is discovered and shared. So impactful storytelling also requires synchronizing how and when and where a story is told to drive the maximum conversation, right? You want it to appear in the right sequence in the right places to maximize things. So in the ideal scenario, work done in one place boosts the overall visibility elsewhere, and because you're working in all 4 of these leaves, you get better overall results than you would in any single one. So, while the landscape's evolved, so have the needs of the tastemakers and the influencers and the gatekeepers, right? So people who play those roles, either informally or formally, are very aware of how constituents act, and they're always looking for stories that are clickable and shareable. And so we have to approach content with that mindset, really designed to present things that will enhance the search and shareability and ultimately action. So, from the perspective of today's audiences, a story that's not tweeted or Facebooked or shared is like the tree falling in the forest. Did anybody even hear it? And that's not necessarily the mindset that organizations have. So when we ask people about what channel they thought was more important, you remember I just showed you something that said 50+% are getting most of their views from their own assets, their own website and constituents. But we ask people, what do you think is the most important channel? Social media blows everything else away, right? Almost 70% of people saying social media. I think that there's 2 things going on there. One is the shiny object syndrome. Everybody's talking about social media all the time, and so if you're asking people what do they think is important, they're saying what they're hearing everybody say that they think is important, which is social media, even though we're not necessarily seeing the kinds of results and actions from social media all the time that we want. There's not a lot of great fundraising examples, for example, from social media yet. But we are seeing social media growing dramatically and growing as a source of views and of access to content in a big way. And so I do think there is a piece of this you have to be careful that we're not jumping so far out in front on the social media side that we forget about what we're trying to get people to do. And at the same time, the writing is on the wall, that social media is very, very important, that investing in our networks and growing those networks and creating content that's shareable is very important. But I think that that's something that needs a very thoughtful approach because, again, it is the kind of thing where you could make lots of investments and then not have a lot to show for it at the end in terms of the actual actions, that have happened. So when we asked people in that issue of social media and we dug into that and said, what do you think is important? Again, this would come as no surprise to you that Facebook was deemed to be critical around video distribution and very important around video distribution. And YouTube as well. Actually, these bars look a little bit off to me in terms of the numbers there a bit. So Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter obviously being highly ranked. Google Plus, we keep hearing that there are actually people on Google Plus. But in terms of how nonprofits think about Google Plus today, nobody's really saying it's critical yet. Vimeo is probably the second most popular place to house video, and it ranks there. And we're seeing small amounts of interest in things like Pinterest being important, and then even smaller amounts of private social networks. So that was a trend that we saw some years ago where people were trying to create sort of their own closed social networks in different ways, and we're seeing less of that today. So this really isn't a surprise, and I think that when you think about how you're growing your video strategy, what you're doing with social media, you really need to think about the framing and the social sharing more so than the particular outlet or tools. Facebook's going to keep changing. New things are going to come up. We are going to see some movement there. YouTube has added all kinds of new social features. It's become much more of a social network as much as it is a place just to host and store videos. And so these things are fluid. The tools are changing and are fluid. Your approach to creating content that is socially relevant and shareable doesn't need to change. That just needs to get better, and then that'll work wherever you're building community. Okay, so I want to just give you a little bit of the YouTube numbers. YouTube has 20,000 plus active nonprofits that are in the YouTube nonprofit program. If you haven't heard of the YouTube nonprofit program, you can just go to youtube.com/nonprofits and you can learn all about it. If you're not in it, you should be, if you're eligible, and you have to apply, and now you apply through Google, and you get approved. So in the U.S., 501c3 organizations, and they have some restrictions about, they don't want political organizations, for example. So there's some restrictions of people who are included, not included. But it pays to be in there because it's free and because they give you things that other organizations don't get in YouTube. For example, one of the things that organizations get are the ability to put clickable annotations in videos that link to outside websites. So anyone with a YouTube channel can put clickable links in their videos, but those links can only go to other YouTube channels or things like subscribe or those kinds of things that are also on YouTube. But a nonprofit can make a video, and at the end of the video, in the video, they can have a button that says donate now, and using YouTube's annotations, they can activate that button so when somebody clicks on it while watching the video on YouTube, or even embedded, it'll go to that donation page of the organization. Nobody gets that except the biggest advertisers on YouTube, but all the nonprofits get it. So that's a tremendous gift from YouTube, and it's something that only 20,000 organizations have taken advantage of. Well, there's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States, so we have lots and lots of folks who are not taking advantage of that. One thing that I feel very heartened by is the fact that there's over 6 billion views of nonprofit videos of those nonprofits in the nonprofit program. And what that says to me really is that there's an audience for things that are socially relevant. So there's no question that there's an audience for things that are socially relevant. And the challenge that we have is framing those things in a way that feels interesting, shareable, and relevant to the people that we're trying to reach. So it doesn't mean we can be boring and people will watch it anyway. But it does mean that there is some hunger and some interest in issues of things that matter beyond the stupid entertainment, beyond the kinds of silly things that we see all the time. So only 588 of those 20,000 nonprofits have more than 1 million views total out of all their videos. So there's only 588 channels that have over 1 million views, right? So that's probably a couple of those are one video that got 1 million views. But most of them are organizations that are posting a lot of regular content. And so they've gotten 1 million views by aggregating and building audience around their videos. Only about 1%, 10% of the organizations are using, that are in the program are using the free donate button that YouTube also gives. So you can get, it's done through Google Wallet, which is one of the Google payment programs, and you can basically activate a donation thing on your channel. Not a lot of downside to that. Not necessarily, nobody's necessarily figured out how to maximize the upside to that today, but we see that only a small number are using it. Another one of the things that YouTube is giving to nonprofits is the ability to live stream content directly from your nonprofit channel. But only 72 nonprofits out of 20,000 have used that. So that's the kind of thing where technology is making it much easier to do something that was very complicated to do before. Only a few years ago, live streaming meant all kinds of technology and connections and things. And today, I can take my phone and live stream an event using the cell network from my phone right into a YouTube channel. It's incredible and remarkable. And any organization that has events or activities should be thinking, hey, is there an audience for this that can't be here today? Is there a group of constituents that are never going to make it, but we want them to feel part of what we're doing. And we have a way to do that that we didn't have before. So this is near the end of the presentation, and we'll have time for questions shortly. But I just want to talk, before we finish up, talk a little bit about the future, which is where's all this going. So on the video side of things, I think the answer is simple. It's more. You think we have a lot of video content out there now. It's only going to get to be more. And so the amount of video, again, this was something I mentioned earlier. Cisco's saying that by 2016, it's only 3 years away, 86% of global consumer internet traffic is going to be video. That's incredible, amazing. And the amount of it is just staggering. Right now, 72 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. Okay, so it's just a massive amount of content. And again, this signals something both positive and negative. Positive, we can be in that mix, and negative, we're in that mix, and it's very, the attention is a challenge to get people's attention. But what does this specifically mean for nonprofits, and what do we do with this information? And I think the future is about more, and so there has to be much more video, but how do we do that? And I think that organizations have to think about that. How do we create the capacity to be doing video more? And then you ask, well, what are we doing video more for? And I think you should be thinking about, what are all the things you're doing today that you write down that will eventually be video? So for example, instead of sending that today you write something that says, this thing just happened and we want to tell you about it. Tomorrow, that's going to be your CEO or somebody on the ground working with your constituents, recording a video from their phone, which has excellent quality, and saying, I want to tell you about this. And you're going to send out an email with that video image in that email. And one of the things we know for sure, because there's been studies about it, people are more likely to open that if it's a video than if it's just text. So that's an example of something where we're spending time writing blog posts and sending emails and other things that much of which will become video. Now that doesn't mean text is dead and going away and anything like that. It's the same as Twitter didn't put blogs out of business exactly, but it created something new. And I think the same is true with video. We're going to see much more of it, and it has to be much more integrated, much more nimble than it is today. So, and that nimble means faster turnaround, and as well as more user participation. So how are we going to get our constituents? The world of social media is a world where your constituents talk back, and that's going to be something that's happening more and more with video as well. And then something you've seen a remarkable progress of I say in our lifetime, I say in the last 2 years, the video is getting easier, that the basic tools are likely already in your pocket. If you don't believe me about that, go to Google and just search on iPhone movies and watch some of the films that people have made just using their iPhones. It's incredible. So things that you would not believe, you would be absolutely sure was shot with super professional cameras and things that were shot with iPhones. So the excuse really that hey, we don't have the equipment, that's really gone away. And something that's important to recognize that I just mentioned a minute ago is that it's not just you that has that camera in your pocket, it's your constituents as well. An amazing thing is, just a few years ago, everybody was talking about those flip cameras, and that the company that made those was bought actually by Cisco, but they went out of business. They closed it because those flip cameras were terrific, but as soon as the writing was on the wall that the iPhone and the Android phones, and all the smartphones the quality was getting better and better and better. And so the folks, just ask Kodak about, the future of cameras. We're seeing the camera be the same device as the phone device, and without sacrificing the quality. The quality is just getting better and better. So it's not the same. We don't use iPhones for professional video production, but the idea that there's an excuse that you can't be doing it is no longer valid. So I just want to close, and we'll start some questions. If you go to c3.com/intofocus, you can sign up for this webinar series that we're doing starting June 18th. And I think these are all Tuesdays, sequential Tuesdays. So one is about planning for video and video-driven campaigns. So it's that piece that we talked about what are we trying to do with this and how does that work. The second one, how to create incredible videos, really about the production process. So what do we know and how can we give you the knowledge to follow some steps that will improve. And the truth is, about how to create incredible video, those steps aren't just for you in-house, they're for you working with outside vendors as well, because you have to take responsibility for making sure that you get what you need when you hire people on the outside as well. And then the last one is about distribution. So how do we use this content we're creating to create the kind of engagement that gets us toward our goals? So I'm going to invite Nasser Asif, our Director of Marketing, to jump in and see if there's questions. And I would not be doing my job if I did not mention that here at C3 that we help organizations with
these things, and you should certainly get in touch with me if you want to talk about your own particular needs. So let's take some questions.
All right, thank you, Michael. Folks, I'm just going to start from some of the questions that we got here towards the end of the program. While I'm doing that, if you guys have additional questions or anything that occurs to you based on any of the questions that we answered, just feel free to post those to that question window, and we'll try to get them taken care of today. Our first question, Michael, is from Jeff Crawford, and Jeff wrote, wondering what works best in terms of measurable fundraising, documentary programs or animation, infogram-style video. Michael, do you want to pick that one up?
Sure. I think that there's, a problem when we want to say, what works best because, I think the question is what works best for us for right now and for this particular situation. So just to say, I think you always need to be fluid. There is not a one-size-fits-all piece here. But I think when we talk about fundraising, I think the first thing to look at is how connected are the people we're trying to raise funds from to our issue already. Because that's critical, because if people already get the problem or are already invested in some way, then we have more flexibility to give them some more depth and let something play out over a little bit longer period of time, because we know that these people have some interest. If you're talking about cold prospects, right, people we don't know that are interested in, the most important thing with fundraising in any video really is to get very quickly to something interesting. And so you can't let something play out. You have to take your best material, the best quote, the most moving photo, and put it up in the first 15 seconds or so, because you're going to lose people. We see people click off so quickly in video. So the idea of if you're going after a new audience, a cold audience, really saying we got to put our best material up front. We have to make things shorter. But the question also about fundraising is, what is the video designed to do? Is it designed to actually be the solicitation, or is it designed, like in the case of many of the St. Jude's videos, to create an emotional foundation where then an in-person ask is going to happen? So you just saw this child with cancer, and then we're going to make an ask to you, and you have that in your mind. You have that emotion in your mind. And so, that emotional piece, I think, in fundraising is under-thought about. There's a lot of logical fundraising going on. And we know, and there's wonderful new behavioral sciences around this that I would encourage you to be reading and looking about, that how people make decisions are often irrational, and so we need to do that. So, but just in terms of your question about style, there's great stuff in every style. There's great animated stuff, great infographics things, great documentary style things, and I think it depends on the issue and you know, your specific situation. So the style itself is not the determinant of the success for that.
Great, thanks, Michael. Our next question is from Cornelia, and she points out that few organizations are using the donate button, one of our findings from the study. Her question is, do you have any figures on how successful organizations are who do use this function?
YouTube did not release to us
specifically what those numbers are, but I know just from my own research that I have not yet heard a case where there's been substantial fundraising from that donate button. So there's been some funds that have come in to organizations that have used it, but you know, there's a couple things that require that to work, which is that you have enough traffic to that YouTube channel page to make it worthwhile, right? So you have enough big enough sample size. And what we've seen a lot of is that the channels of organizations are often made up of a random set of videos that were originally developed for some other purpose, right? So you created a video for your homepage, you created a video for a campaign, and your YouTube channel is basically just all these videos put there. And there's no narrative arc, there's no path for people to learn and then be solicited. And so I think that there is a possibility that those donate buttons could be very useful, but only in a world where we've created a community there, and we have videos that take people on a supporter journey from understanding the issue to understanding why it's important to donate to us. So I would say, I would just say, to me, that is not the first thing on your list. Putting a donate button anywhere, on your website even, is not making donations happen. It's that supporter journey that you develop. And so if you can develop that supporter journey on YouTube, if you've committed to that, then the donate button makes a lot of sense there. If you haven't committed to that, then there might be no downside to putting it there, but you shouldn't expect a lot of return.
Thanks, Michael, and great question, Cornelia. By the way, for those of you joining us from outside the U.S., Cornelia kindly pointed out that YouTube is actually currently expanding the nonprofit program. She pointed out that her organization launched it in Germany at the beginning of May, which is great to know and definitely good news for the community at large. I'm going to move on to our next question, which is from Mike Ewing. Mike makes a great point. I'm going to read back his question. He says, these stats definitely tell me that nonprofits are using video and that people are watching video. But why should nonprofits use video, especially since most don't know what they can accomplish with it? What are the most measurable results that organizations could identify?
Yeah, I think there's different layers to that question, which is why should organizations be using it? Well, if video is what everyone is paying attention to all the time, then if you're not there, then how will you get anybody's attention? So I think that there's a kind of obvious piece there, which is that again, if 86% of all consumer internet traffic is video, and billions and billions of hours of people's time are being spent with video, don't you want to be in that mix? Don't you need to be? Because don't you require your constituents to pay attention to you in some way? And the things that are able to, and I think really the downside piece is this, is that the people who are going to be able to capture that attention are the ones who are growing. And we're already seeing that, I think, among organizations. It's not a coincidence that some of the hottest, fastest growing nonprofits today are very media-centric organizations. So look at an organization like Charity Water, which is only a few years old, growing very rapidly. They have media in their DNA. They're filming everything. They're sharing everything. They have a video culture, and it matters. And it's much harder for older, larger organizations to act as nimbly and do as much. And I think it's going to be harder for them to grow. At the same time, I think there's lots of great examples of video achieving success, both from a fundraising and advocacy and awareness perspective as well. And we put many of those examples in the report. So if you haven't, again, this is a free report. If you haven't downloaded it, there's a lot of video examples in there and case studies of organizations using video to great success. So I think to look at those and say, well, do these examples fit our case? Are these sort of the kinds of things we're trying to do, and what was successful there? But I would also say, related to this question, don't overpromise results from video, or you're going to turn your own organization off from it. When you say, we're going to make this one video, it's going to cost us a lot of money, but it's going to change everything, right? If that doesn't work out, and it probably won't, nobody's going to want to invest again. But if you say, hey, we're going to start with our iPhone, and we're going to make thank you videos to donors, and you're going to see how incredibly moved they are by having a personal video from staff here thanking them for their donation. And that cost us next to zero, and there's going to be some impact. And what the leadership will say then is, hey, let's do more of that. Let's do the next thing. So thinking about what are those small victories, and then how do we move on from there?
All right, thanks, Michael. Our next question is from Mirtha, and she asks, did your research look into what is the ideal length of video used for fundraising? How about story arc? Anything around how the content is produced to make it most interesting to the audience?
Those are great questions. I get a lot of questions often about length. And I think, the length of the video, the right length of the video, well, there's a bunch of answers to this question. The first answer, which sounds a little bit flippant, which is right, which is the video should only be as long as it needs to be. And now, most of the time, it can be a lot shorter than you think it needs to be. But the real thing that's important to keep in mind is that the length of the video is related to a person's interest in what you have to say. So, for example, someone who's volunteering for your organization will probably be happy to watch a 1-hour training video for your organization because they've invested in that and they're doing something meaningful. And so that video can be long. That's just, an example. An existing constituent who's getting a report about where their money went would likely watch a longer video because they've already invested in that and they want to know about it. Whereas someone who has never heard of your organization is going to have much less attention span. And for those people, I think a good target for something like that is around 1.5 minutes, which is often hard to get. It's not rules are meant to be broken, right? So there's wonderful videos that are longer than that. And of course, there are things like the exception that proves the rule, like the Coney 2012 video, which was 29 minutes long and was seen by 150 million people. So the idea that people are only watching one length or another is not right. But again, think, how close are these people to us and our issue? The closer they are, the longer they'll watch. But we should only, even in those cases, it should only be as long as it really has to be.
Great, thanks, Michael. We have an interesting technical question here. Translation is an issue for global organizations with global donors. Any advice about translation?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree, and I would say something else about translation, which is that search functions have become very important, and as you know, search uses metadata to find things. So the title of the video becomes very important, or the description of the video becomes important. But when you attach a transcript to a video, that's also metadata that can be tracked by search engines. And so it's related to this issue of translation because you can, by having subtitles as one way to do translation, you're also increasing and enhancing your visibility in search engines. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend you go to the company .sub, DOTSUB.com. And .sub is the technology provider behind the most interesting video translation things happening on the web today, including TED Talks. If you've ever been to TED Talks and you can scroll down a whole list of languages and watch this talk in this language or see a transcript in another language, all of that technology is coming from .sub. And it's something that we're offering here at C3 for our clients is to put transcripts and then to have those translations made And the translations, one of the interesting things about .sub technology is the translations can happen through crowdsourcing as well. So you can have individuals in your community doing translation for you. But I would say, you also, if you're working in multiple markets, sometimes we'll do things that are more voiceover oriented than documentary style oriented because we want to be able to have voiceover in those different languages. And so we've designed the videos to be redubbed in another language, and so they're designed to feel very natural in those languages. So you have to make some decisions about whether you're subtitling or you're changing the audio or those kind of things. But I would say it's highly important to do something if you want to work in other communities, because you'll be amazed that once you have that German transcript, all of a sudden there's people finding you who never found you before. Okay, we're at our time, but I will stick around. We'll answer 2 more questions today, and if we didn't get to your question and you've put it in the chat box, we'll try to get back to you with an answer. And if you have a question, you can email me at michael@c3.com, or you can use that hashtag #IntoFocus, and you can post a question or comment on Twitter or anywhere else, and we're certainly happy for you to tell folks that about what you've learned and what's in the report.
All right, great. Thanks, Michael. Our penultimate question is again from Cornelia. Great question from her. It's about measuring the impact of video. Cornelia asks, can you name examples of clear, attainable goals and how they can be measured? So, for instance, how can raising awareness, quote unquote, for instance, be narrowed down to a clear goal?
Right. Well, raising awareness is a challenge because the question is, what was awareness before and what is awareness after? And so we have clients who are doing larger projects or initiatives over longer periods of time where they'll actually do surveying, and they'll say, they'll have some kind of baseline beforehand, and then they'll take some kind of measurement or survey afterwards and say, did we move the needle? Right? But that's expensive, and sometimes you think, well, we just can't afford to do that, and so that's why the raising awareness piece often is very hard to translate. But we do videos all the time that have very clear goals. So, for example, advocacy video where the goal is petition signatures, and this video is the primary piece of content that's going to drive people from a social media site or somewhere else to sign a petition, and we measure that by, hey, we have a goal of petition signatures. And if we don't meet the goal of petition signatures, something didn't work right. And sometimes we can say, well, it certainly was the video that didn't work right. Or we could say we found out, hey, people were watching the video, they were clicking, and they got caught up somewhere else in the process. So I think, again, I would start from your goals first, not from the video. So the goals are to what? To raise money, to get more people, to get sign-ups, for something to happen. And then you need some kind of theory of change that goes from the beginning to that goal. So there's a person, they've never heard of us, they're going to hear of us. What might happen after they hear of us? They have to hear of us again, let's say, we think. So you have to create some theory, some idea of how this mechanism will work and what role the video will play. And then you need to go back through that chain and say, how are we measuring each of these steps?
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. Our last question today is from Brett, and Brett has a pretty weighty question. And Michael, if it's okay with you, I think I'm going to try to tackle this one. Brett asks, what is C3's general PR strategy or place to start that you recommend for nonprofits so they can take advantage of or connect to social media influencers who have related content or interest to that organization's mission? Brett, that's a great question. It's probably the subject of, I don't know, like a 5-part webinar series, TBD. But to try to answer your question as briefly as I can, I would say it's about relationship building, and in C3's experience, and I think most PR professionals' experience, it's going to be a matter of really doing the research and identifying those people out in the world who are more likely to use your content, and then finding a way to establish a relationship with them them. I think a smart strategic way to do that is obviously researching and building your list and managing those people out of your CRM system or whatever, but understanding also that they're the end point in a way in your workflow of videos. So when you're sitting down to the table to plan and really plan out and create video content, this goes back to Michael's point about distribution being part of the video work continuum. You need to be thinking about what you can make and how you can tweak your videos in post-production and in editing to sort of fit their content needs and work for them. The big takeaway here is I'd say always be producing with your end audience in mind whenever you can be, and that will actually increase your chances of being able to get this picked up by people who need to push it out to their own audiences.
Great. Thank you, Nasser. That's exactly right. So thank you all for joining us. We're a little bit over time. Hopefully it was instructive. We certainly invite you to download the report if you haven't done that. Look it over. There's a lot more there, and there's great tips and tricks videos. And you can tweet about it at IntoFocus, hashtag IntoFocus, and certainly look for these other webinars which are going to dig in much more to those questions of distribution and production and planning. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.